Everyone, it's my privilege to welcome you to Unit 3 of 1 Corinthians at Pentecostal Theological Seminary. So glad that we've had such a great start to the class. You've probably noticed that for the first 2 units, we have comprehensively spent our time building the raw materials that are going to inform our reading of the actual letter of 1 Corinthians. We've looked at the ancient city of Corinth as well as the character and the contours of Paul's mission to ancient Corinth. Now we're finally ready to turn to the letter of 1 Corinthians itself. This week we're going to be looking at the primary subject matter, the thesis of 1 Corinthians, which you'll see in the opening verses, are all about schisms that have developed. Paul says that certain members of the community are allying themselves in an unhealthy way with various Christian leaders. They're saying, I follow Paul, I follow Cephas, I follow Apollos. And of course you've got that uber spiritual group that doesn't need any human mediator and says, I follow Christ. And so we'll be looking at some of the options that scholars pose to deal with those schisms and to describe their nature. For example, some might see these schisms as theological in nature. Indeed, Paul immediately moves from the schisms to talking about baptism. Was a particular view of baptism linked to these schisms in the church? Others would say that these schisms have formed around the very apostles that Paul cites. Peter, Paul, Apollos. Others would say, no, that's just a rhetorical maneuver. What I'm going to be pushing, my viewpoint throughout the class, is that these schisms are about leadership. They are about apostolic authority, but even more, they are about social status. They're about a few higher status persons in the Corinthian community that comprise a dominant minority, and they expect their leader, in this case Paul, to adhere to the norms of Greco-Roman leadership. Paul, of course, is going to push back on that, and he's going to push back on his fundamental rhetorical enemy in 1 Corinthians 1 through 4, who I would suggest is Apollos. I look forward to you dialoguing with that point of view in the next few weeks. Certainly, I don't have the final word. I just want to push you to see the options. I'm going to be grading your reflection papers from Unit 2 in the next few days, so look for those to hit your box along with my individual comments, and if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with me. We have a few different readings this week. In addition to the fee commentary, there's a small section from Margaret Mitchell's magisterial work on the rhetoric of 1 Corinthians. Margaret Mitchell was my professor at the University of Chicago, and this is a very important book in the history of interpretation, only about a generation old now, in which she argues that 1 Corinthians is a piece of deliberative rhetoric meant to appeal to the Corinthian sense of communality. That begins with Paul's thesis statement in 1:10 that we're going to be carefully looking at this week. We'll also have a reading from Lawrence Wellborn, in which he studies Paul's strategy in 1 Corinthians 1 through 4 and compares it to various political speeches and strategies in the Greco-Roman world. I think you'll find them both enlightening. Looking forward to engaging with you and hope you have a wonderful week. God bless.